Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm going to be looking at the third album from Daft Punk, Human After All. Finally back to doing throwback reviews. I'm picking up right where I left off, reviewing the rest of Daft Punk's discography. Anyway, after Discovery, Daft Punk did a 180 again, switching from more of a pop sound to really rough-edged and more aggressive material, much like on Homework. Also, this album is highly repetitive, much like on Homework. Now, I should think by this point we all know and are unsurprisingly angry at the fact that I didn't love Homework. Human After All suffers from a lot of the same problems as Homework, and honestly I think those problems are magnified quite a bit on this album as well. Though there's no songs that stretch on for 7 minutes, the album doesn't really try to even reach the same heights of Homework. There's only 10 songs, well, really 9 songs, I don't think On Off counts, and they're all extremely repetitive. I almost get the feeling that Daft Punk were intentionally trying to be annoying and grating on this album. But you know the weird part? I liked this album. A lot. More so than Homework. I do think it would be pushing it a bit to say that I love Human After All. It's certainly not on the same level as Discovery, but despite its many flaws, I still kinda have a soft spot for this album. Or maybe a hard spot, because this album is anything but soft. As I mentioned, this album is extremely loud, rough-edged, aggressive, and grating, not to mention very simplistic and repetitive, all to a more intense degree than on Homework. There really isn't much to the album. But honestly, I see that more as a good thing, since that means filler gets cut and there's less room for mediocrity. Of course, there are still a few tracks that don't do much for me, but for the most part, I like how completely off the chain and intense it is. Right off the bat, they hit you with the title track, Human After All, which sets the tone for the album, and is, not to mention, incessantly catchy. Simple, intense, repetitive, but still definitely memorable. Then there's Prime Time of Your Life. This is one of the more interesting cuts from the album, starting out with a bunch of vocoders singing a melody that I can never help but sing along with. The prime time of your life, gonna do it now, don't wait and live. But about halfway in, it breaks into this weird breakdown that just keeps increasing in tempo until it's like things have gotten so crazy that the song can't even handle it and it just ends. Great track. Next up is Robot Rock, which is mostly based around one disappointingly unchanged sample of Release the Beast by Breakwater. I'd call this a least favorite if it were not for the fact that I heard this song before I heard the original, and I will still always hear Robot Rock instead of Release the Beast. Gotta give credit where credit is due, but I can still mark this one as a favorite. Steam Machine is often picked as a least favorite, and though I can see why, what with the not particularly catchy melody, the repetitiveness, and it's possibly being too long for its own good, I agree to some extent, but I do still quite like that bass line and those weird voices that say the name of the track. It may not be one of the better tracks, but it's still a good one. Make Love is next, and this gives the album a much-needed break from all the intense grittiness. It's very simple and laid back, kind of feels like a slightly faster Something About Us. And sure, it is very repetitive. It just takes that one funk sample and repeats it for 4 minutes, occasionally adding this little quiet vocoder saying the title a few times on top. But I could put this track on repeat for quite a while. I just love the chilled out feel I get from it and how it contrasts so much from the rest of the album. Definitely one of my favorites. Of course, directly after the chill out track, we're hit with easily the most intense track on the album, and arguably the most intense Daft Punk track to date, the Brainwasher. While the transition is so drastic it might cause whiplash if you don't see it coming, Brainwashers is another favorite of mine. It's got a catchy melody, just the sheer raw aggressiveness of it just makes for a highly memorable track. Television Rules the Nation is next, and this track is nothing too special, but pretty catchy. As Daft Punk repeat the song title over and over, you get the ever so slight urge to just smash your television open with the guitar. Except then you remember that if you actually tried it, then the guitar would be more likely to break than the TV, so you ignore the urge. Good song though. After this we get Technologic, another one of the big singles and a fan favorite, though to be honest I'm not a huge fan of this one. I mean, the bass line's catchy and all, but all those chipmunk voices get annoying pretty quickly, especially within such a repetitive song. Finally, the album closes out with Emotion, and the main problem with this one is that it really feels like it overstayed its welcome. I'll give it that the synth chords actually do sound kind of emotional, and that when it's running full force with bass line and drums and everything, it sounds very satisfying. But I get the feeling that it went on just 1 or 2 minutes too long. Pretty much every song on this album was around 4 minutes long. This song almost reaches the 7-minute mark. I really can't count songs this long and repetitive in Daft Punk's favor, especially considering what we got on Homework. And its slow tempo doesn't help, but it does still make for a satisfying end, and I'd be more willing to praise the feels I got out of it rather than criticize its unjustified running time. It can get boring, yes, but they've done worse. So overall, this album's not without its flaws, especially in that it's unnecessarily repetitive, and if you're not in the right mood, it can get really grating and tiring, not to mention empty and lacking in substance. But I found the catchiness of the album to win out in the end, and really only on one track does the repetition really get grating enough to the point where it actually takes away from the album's experience, that track being Emotion. It's not great, but I still enjoyed it quite a bit. However, when all is said and done, I don't see myself returning to this album a lot in the future. Much like with Homework, though I love a lot of individual parts, I just get this weird feeling of emptiness and not really feeling the need to listen to it over and over. Perhaps this was because I heard Alive 2007 before either of them. Alive 2007, for those of you who don't already know, is one of the most amazing live albums I've ever heard, seamlessly mixing and mashing together all of Daft Punk's greatest hits from their first 3 albums into one huge and mind-blowing experience. On one hand, the attention to detail on Alive 2007 is unbelievable, and since I made the maybe mistake of listening to it first, Homework and Human After All looked pretty disappointing in comparison. But at the same time, I was much less disappointed by Human After All than I was disappointed by Homework. And Homework, without question, has more substance to it than Human After All, so I don't know. But Human After All is still a winner in my book, all things considered. Overall, feeling a 7.7 out of 10. Favorite tracks: Human After All, The Prime Time of Your Life, Robot Rock, Make Love, The Brainwasher, Television Rules the Nation. Least favorite track: Technologic. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it. If you do, make sure to tell me about it in the comments. Or if you have any requests for what I should review in the future, make sure to tell me about that too. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.